Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku fought Thanos before the Avengers could arrive. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air over the skeletal remains of Kamino Ward tasted of ash and regret. It was a flavor Izuku Midoriya had grown intimately familiar with. 6 months had passed since the Paranormal Liberation War had ripped their society down to its studs, and the work of rebuilding was a slow, grueling beast. The villains hadn't vanished, they had scattered, festering in the cracks of a broken world, and new ones, drunk on the chaos, had crawled out of the woodwork. Today's problem had a name, Chronomo. His quirk was as pretentious as his moniker. He didn't control time, not really. He chewed on the fabric of space-time, creating jagged, unstable rifts that looked like shards of shattered glass hanging in the air. Anything that passed through was shunted to a random location within a few kilometers, but the process was violent and unpredictable. A person could arrive unharmed, or they could arrive as a fine red mist. It was this chaotic lethality that had earned him a top priority designation. Izuku, Deku, was a blur of motion against the bruised twilight sky. His suit, the Gamma version upgraded with support items from Meihatsum and reinforced with plates from Melissa's shield, was scarred and dirty. It was a testament to his new reality, a constant, running battle. Black Whip! He yelled, the word a sharp bark. Tendrils of dark energy erupted from his arms, not to attack, but to anchor. They latched onto the steel skeletons of half-collapsed office buildings, creating a safety net 100 feet above the street where Chronomo was gleefully tearing reality asunder. Below, a group of displaced office workers huddled behind a flipped armored car, their faces pale with terror. He's opening another one, directly above them, shouted a voice in his ear, the calm, authoritative tone of Shoto Todoroki. A sheet of ice instantly rose from the ground, forming a thick, angled canopy over the civilians just as a shimmering rift blinked into existence above it. The ice groaned and cracked as chunks of it were sliced away into nothingness, but it held. Deku landed silently on the roof of a nearby building, his breathing controlled. He was no longer the frantic, panicking boy who broke his bones with every other move. The war had forged him into something else. The vestiges of One for All were a constant counsel in his mind, their experiences a library he could draw from. He felt the familiar tingle of danger sense a split second before a rift opened right where he'd been standing. He was already moving. One for All, full cal coursed through him at a steady 30%. Green lightning crackled around his form, kicking up dust and debris. He was faster, stronger, and more precise than ever. He had to be. Chronomo cackled from the center of the ruined intersection. He was a wiry man in a cheap pinstripe suit, his eyes wide with manic glee. See, hero? See how fragile it all is, your buildings, your laws, your precious order. Just a thin sheet of paper waiting for a sharp edge. I'm just providing the edge, you're hurting innocent people. Deku called back, his voice amplified by the masked speaker. His eyes, glowing with green energy, were scanning, analyzing. His rifts are chaotic, but there's a pattern. He has to gesture, to carve the air. The bigger the rift, the longer the gesture. His own body is the anchor point. To stop him, I have to get close. That was the problem. Getting close to a man whose defensive perimeter was literal, unpredictable oblivion. F.A. Jean, he whispered to himself, crouching low and beginning to build kinetic energy. He rocked back and forth, the movement almost imperceptible, coiling power into his muscles like a spring. The fourth user's quirk was a game-changer, allowing him to build explosive power without having to tap into the raw, bone-breaking percentages of One for All. You can't save everyone, little hero. Chronomo taunted, spreading his arms wide. This city is a tumor. I'm the surgeon. He swiped his hand horizontally, and a massive, shimmering tear, 100 feet long, appeared in the air between them. It distorted the view of the city behind it, making the skeletal skyscrapers wobble like a desert mirage. Now, Deku released the stored energy. He didn't launch himself forward. He launched himself up. He shot into the sky like a cannonball, a streak of green against the crimson clouds. From his vantage point, he could see the full tactical situation. Endeavor was coordinating the evacuation perimeter 3 blocks down, his flames a beacon in the gloom. Uraraka was using her quirk to lift heavy debris, clearing paths for emergency services. The rest of Class 1A were scattered, handling crowd control and support. They were a well-oiled machine. Smoke screen! A thick cloud of black smoke erupted from his position, obscuring him from Chronoma's view. It was the sixth user's gift. In the middle of the smoke, he pivoted, using Black Whip to swing around the edge of a skyscraper. He was now behind Chronoma, dropping out of the sky like a hawk. Danger sense flared, a sharp spike of pain behind his eyes. A rift opened just below him. He reacted instantly, using an Air Force blast from his gauntlet to alter his trajectory, zipping sideways. He landed hard, rolling to dissipate the momentum. He was now 30 feet away. Close enough. It's over, Chronoma, Deku said, rising to his feet. Surrender. We can get you help. It was the line he always used. The line All Might would have used. Even after everything, after the war, after seeing the worst of humanity, he still believed it. He had to. Chronoma turned, a snarl twisting his features. Help? You think I need help? I have seen the truth. There is no meaning, no pattern. There is only chaos, and it is beautiful. His hands began to glow with a sickly, rainbow-hued light. The air around him grew heavy, charged with ozone and something else, something that smelled like a thunderstorm and tasted of static. He's overloading. Nana Shimura's voice echoed in his mind, not a memory, but a living warning. Izuku, he's going to release it all at once. Deku saw it too. The man's skin was cracking, the prismatic light shining from within. He was turning himself into a dimensional bomb. There was no time to think, no time to analyze. Only time to act. He pushed One for All to 45%. The power was a roaring inferno under his skin, a familiar pain he had learned to master. His legs bunched, and he shot forward, a green comet leaving a trench in the asphalt. His goal wasn't to hit Chronoma, but to grab him and contain the blast, or throw him skyward. It was a hero's calculus, his own safety a distant second to the safety of the city. He was 5 feet away when Chronoma looked at him, a single, lucid tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. Let it all end, he whispered, and then, he imploded. There was no sound. No explosion of light and force. Just a silent, violent inversion. The world dissolved. Deku's outstretched hand, inches from the villain's chest, plunged into a perfect sphere of absolute nothingness that had once been Chronoma. For a single, terrifying moment, Deku felt a sensation he had no words for. It was not pain. Pain was a signal from the body that something was wrong. This was the body itself ceasing to be. He felt his atoms being unwritten, his existence being erased from the page. The roaring inferno of One for All was snuffed out like a candle. The voices of the vestiges went silent. The green lightning vanished. He was being pulled through the keyhole of reality. He felt the cold of the void, a temperature so absolute it burned. He saw colors that his brain could not process, geometries that defied logic. 1,000,000,000,000 shattered windows flew past him, each one a different reality, a different possibility. He saw a world where All Might was a villain, a world where quirks never existed, a world of talking animals walking on 2 legs. They were fleeting glimpses of an infinite library he was being violently dragged through. His consciousness, his very soul, was fraying. He was dissolving into the static between dimensions. Then, a flicker. Deep within the storm of uncreation, a single point of light remained. One for all. It was more than a quirk. It was a legacy. A torch passed from hand to hand, soul to soul. The combined will of 9 heroes, a collective spirit that refused to be extinguished. It became his anchor, a lighthouse in the maelstrom. The vestiges were there, not speaking, but being. Their presence was a shield, a bulwark against the utter dissolution. He felt a pull, a cosmic hook snagging him from the non-space. The sensation of being unwritten was reversed. He was being stitched back together, rethreaded into the tapestry of existence, but the pattern was wrong. The threads were alien. The return of sensation was a physical assault. First came gravity, slamming into him like a freight train. Then air, thin and sharp, scorching his lungs. Then light, a blinding crimson that seared his retinas. And finally, the ground. He didn't land. He crashed. He plowed through a field of what looked like rusted, twisted metal spars, each one screeching as his body tore it from its mooring. The impact was a brutal, bone-jarring punctuation mark at the end of an impossible sentence. He skidded for 100 feet, carving a deep furrow in the reddish-brown dirt before finally tumbling to a halt in a crumpled heap. For a long minute he didn't move. Every part of his body screamed in protest. His head throbbed with a migraine that felt like a pickaxe being driven into his skull. He coughed, and the air that filled his lungs was thin, metallic, and achingly cold. It didn't feel right. It didn't taste right. It didn't smell right. Slowly, groaning with the effort, he pushed himself onto his hands and knees. The ground beneath him wasn't soil. It was a fine, metallic dust, the color of dried blood. He looked at his hands. His gloves were torn, but he was solid. He was whole. He lifted his head, and his breath hitched. This was not Kamino. This was not Japan. This was not Earth. He was in a graveyard of giants. The landscape was a panorama of surreal destruction under a sky of bruised violet and angry crimson. A strange, dim sun hung low on the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows. Jagged, organically shaped rock formations, like the ribs of some colossal, long-dead beast, clawed at the sky. And dominating the view was the source of the debris he'd crashed through, a gargantuan, shattered torus of obsidian metal, a spaceship of a design so alien it made his mind ache. It was broken in half, its guts spilling out onto the desolate plains. The gravity felt lighter. When he pushed himself up, there was a strange buoyancy to his movements. But it was the silence that was most unnerving. There was no birdsong, no city hum, no wind rustling through trees. Only a low, mournful whistle as the thin atmosphere slipped through the alien wreckage. Where am I? The question was a primal scream in his head. The villain's quirk. It didn't just displace me. It sent me somewhere else. A different world? A different dimension? His analytical mind, a tool honed by years of muttering and note-taking, tried to assert itself over the rising panic. Assess the situation. 1. I am alive. 2. I am in an unknown, hostile-looking environment. 3. I need to find out where I am and how to get back. It was then that he heard it. Not the wind, but the distinct, concussive boom of an explosion. It was followed by a flash of brilliant purple light. His head snapped in the direction of the sound. About half a mile away, nestled in a separate field of debris, a battle was raging. Or rather, a battle was in its final, desperate throes. His hero instincts, his very core programming, took over. He forgot his own disorientation, his own fear. People were fighting. People were in danger. He started moving, his initial steps clumsy in the unfamiliar gravity before his body instinctively adapted. He kept low, using the giant metal scraps for cover, his green suit a surprisingly effective camouflage against the strange, oxidized landscape. As he got closer, the sounds became clearer, the whine of advanced weaponry, the crackle of strange energies, the grunts of pain. He peered over a twisted metal plate, and his eyes widened in disbelief. It was a tableau of impossible beings. A man in a suit of sleek, red and gold armor that seemed to flow and reform like liquid metal was being blasted back by a wave of purple energy. A figure with gray skin and red tattoos, built like a mountain, was being systematically dismantled, his body turned to a column of stone cubes that then crumbled to dust. A woman with antennae was swatted aside like a fly. A man in a red leather duster fired 2 futuristic pistols, but the energy bolts they fired were turned into a swarm of harmless bubbles that floated away on the thin breeze. And at the center of it all was the cause. He was a titan. A colossal being, standing at least 8 feet tall, with deep purple skin and a face lined with a grim, weary certainty. He wore golden armor and a massive gauntlet on his left hand. The gauntlet, it glowed with an unholy light, 6 brightly colored stones embedded in its knuckles, each one pulsing with its own cosmic rhythm. His quirk, Deku thought instantly, his analytical mind kicking into high gear. No, not a quirk. The power is coming from the gauntlet. Each stone, a different ability? The purple one seems to be raw power, energy projection. The blue one, he just appeared behind the man with the guns, so teleportation or spatial manipulation. The red one, it turned those blasts to bubbles. Reality warping? This is beyond anything I've ever seen. This is on a whole other level from All for One. He watched, horrified, as a young man, a boy really, not much older than himself, in a red and blue suit swung in on a web-like thread. He was agile, and possibly so, moving with a fluid grace that reminded Deku of his own shoot style. "You can't win!" the boy yelled, his voice youthful and strained. He shot a volley of webs, trying to gum up the gauntlet. The purple giant, Thanos, didn't even seem to notice. With a contemptuous flick of his wrist, he used the blue stone to open a small portal in front of him. The webs flew into it and disappeared. He then casually backhanded the boy as he swung past. The impact sent the young hero tumbling through the air, crashing into the debris with a sickening thud. He didn't get up. Deku felt a cold dread snake its way up his spine. This wasn't a fight. This was an execution. Only two combatants remained standing against the Titan. One was a man in flowing blue robes and a red cape that seemed to have a life of its own. He conjured glowing orange shields, intricate mandalas of light, and shimmering whips of energy. He was a master, his every move precise and powerful. For a moment, Deku thought he might have a chance. The man created dozens of duplicates of himself, all of them lashing out at the giant. Thanos just smiled, a grim, tired little thing. He clenched his gauntlet, and the purple and blue stones flared. A wave of energy erupted outwards, shattering the duplicates like glass and blasting the real sorcerer back. Thanos strode forward, pulled him up by the collar, and ripped a glowing green amulet from his neck. He tried to crush it, but it sparked and revealed itself to be a fake. "You are full of tricks, wizard," Thanos rumbled, his voice a deep baritone that vibrated in Deku's bones. He slammed the sorcerer to the ground, pinning him under a collapsed pillar of rock. One left. The man in the iron armor. He was back on his feet, his suit reforming around him. He looked battered, exhausted, but his posture was defiant. Deku's heart hammered against his ribs. He didn't know these people. He didn't know this world, this planet, this conflict. But he knew heroism when he saw it. He saw it in the boy in red and blue, in the determined man in the iron suit, in the powerful wizard. And he recognized pure, indomitable villainy in the purple giant. He recognized the look of a tyrant who believed so completely in his own righteousness that any atrocity was justified. He had seen that look in All for One's eyes. The man in the iron suit launched a final, desperate assault, a barrage of missiles and laser beams that exploded against the Titan's body. Thanos simply raised the gauntlet, the purple power stone glowing brightly, and absorbed the entire onslaught. He then fired a concentrated beam of the same energy back, a lance of pure destruction that tore through the Iron Man's defenses and sent him crashing to the ground, his armor sparking and failing. Thanos walked over to the downed man, his heavy footsteps echoing in the sudden quiet. He stood over him, a mountain of purple muscle and cosmic power. The man's helmet retracted, revealing a human face, middle-aged, with a goatee, his eyes filled with pain, fear, and an unyielding core of defiance. "You have my respect, Stark," the Titan said, his voice surprisingly soft. "When I'm done, half of humanity will still be alive. I hope they remember you." He raised the gauntlet, the four stones pulsing with imminent death, and in that moment, something inside Izuku Midoriya snapped. All the confusion, all the fear, all the disorientation of the past few minutes boiled away, leaving behind a single, diamond-hard certainty. He was a hero. His personal problems did not matter. His location did not matter. The only thing that mattered was the scene unfolding before him. A villain was about to murder a man who had fought to the bitter end to protect others. That was a line Izuku could not let be crossed. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He reacted. He felt the familiar, comforting roar as One for All answered his call. It surged through his veins, not as a raging torrent that threatened to break him, but as a deep, powerful river he could command. Green lightning, so out of place in this red world, flared to life, crackling around his body and illuminating the wreckage he hid behind. The very air around him vibrated with power. Inside his soul, he felt the vestiges stir. He felt Nana Shimura's fierce protectiveness, Yoichi's defiant spark, the quiet, solid readiness of the others. They were with him. He pushed off from his hiding spot. He didn't use FA gene to build power. He didn't need it. His righteous fury was fuel enough. He didn't use smokescreen to hide. He didn't want to. He wanted the villain to see him coming. He channeled the power into his right leg, the metal sole of his boot glowing with contained energy. For the battered heroes on the ground, it was as if a piece of the alien sky had suddenly come alive. Tony Stark, bleeding from a wound in his side, looked up into the face of his executioner. He had done everything he could. He had fought. And he had lost. He braced himself for the end. Thanos prepared to clench his fist, to use the Power Stone to turn Stark to atoms. Then he paused. A flicker of movement at the edge of his vision. A flash of green. A sound like a thunderclap in a vacuum. From the shattered husk of the Q ship, a figure erupted, moving with a speed that defied belief. It was a blur of green lightning and furious purpose. In the span of a single heartbeat, the figure crossed the 200 yards separating them. Thanos' cosmic awareness, honed by centuries of conquest, screamed a warning, but his body was too slow to react. The attack wasn't a punch. It was a kick. A devastating axe kick, delivered with the force of a meteor. Detroit. Smash! The name of the move was a guttural roar, lost to the thin air, but the power behind it was universal. The reinforced sole of Deku's boot connected not with Thanos' head or chest, but with the back of the Infinity Gauntlet itself. The sound was not a fleshy impact. It was the sound of a church bell being struck by a sledgehammer. A deafening boom echoed across the plains of Titan, followed by a shockwave of pure kinetic force that ripped through the air. The ground buckled. Dust and debris were blasted outwards in a perfect circle. Thanos, who had just weathered a full-scale assault from Iron Man without flinching, was thrown off balance. His entire body shuddered from the sheer, unexpected force. The gauntlet, aimed at Tony's face, was knocked violently skyward. The purple energy he had been about to unleash discharged harmlessly into the crimson clouds, setting the alien sky alight. The Titan grunted, a sound of pure shock and pain, and stumbled back a full step, then another, his arm numb and tingling from the unimaginable force of the blow. Silence fell. A profound, absolute silence broken only by the faint, whistling wind and the crackle of green bioelectricity slowly dissipating from the newcomer. Tony Stark stared, his mind failing to process what he had just seen. 1 second, he was about to die. The next, a kid in a tattered green rabbit costume had appeared from literally nowhere, and kicked the most powerful being in the universe halfway across the battlefield. He could only manage a choked, "What the?" Peter Parker, groaning as he pushed himself up from the rubble, his spider sense still blaring a dull alarm, looked on with wide, disbelieving eyes. Whoa! The Guardians, scattered and broken, all turned their heads to the impossible sight. And Doctor Strange, pinned but very much aware, felt a jolt that had nothing to do with his injuries. He had peered into the future. He had viewed 14,605 possible outcomes. He had seen every move, every word, every sacrifice. He had seen the one path to victory, a long, painful, sacrificial road. This was not on that road. This boy, this green lightning, this impossible variable, he wasn't in any of them. Izuku Deku Midoriya stood between the fallen hero and the universal tyrant. He was panting, his body trembling from the exertion, but his stance was firm. He lowered his leg, his eyes, glowing with the emerald fire of one for all, fixed squarely on the bewildered face of the mad Titan. He didn't know where he was, or who these people were, but one thing was crystal clear. A hero had been needed. And he had arrived. The echo of the impact hung in the thin, alien air, a defiant note of sound in a world that had fallen silent. It was a physical thing, a pressure wave that washed over the battered heroes, clearing the dust from around them and making the loose scraps of metal on the ground chime like a discordant wind chime. For a moment, all was still. Izuku Midoriya stood his ground, a small, vibrant green figure against the vast canvas of red dust and cosmic ruin. His leg throbbed, a deep, resonant ache that was the familiar price of a high-output smash. But he gritted his teeth and forced it down. Pain was an old friend. He watched Thanos, his senses on a knife's edge, every muscle coiled and ready. The Titan hadn't fallen, but he had been moved. He had been forced. In the calculus of this impossible battle, that felt like a monumental victory, Thanos slowly lowered his arm, flexing the fingers of the Infinity Gauntlet. A faint, angry red glow pulsed from the URU metal where Deku's boot had connected. He looked at his arm, then at the boy. The expression on his face was not the incandescent fury Tony Stark had expected. It was something far more unnerving, a deep, profound curiosity. It was the look of a master watchmaker who had found a gear in his grand design that he did not recognize. A new challenger, Thanos rumbled, his voice a low vibration that seemed to come from the very ground. He tilted his massive head, his dark eyes scrutinizing Deku with an unnerving intensity. He saw the tattered costume, the sturdy iron sole boots, the wild shock of green-black hair. He saw the raw, bioluminescent energy that still crackled faintly around the boy's frame. It was not the ordered light of the Mind Stone, nor the chaotic energy of the Power Stone. It wasn't the arcane signature of the Sorcerer Supreme's magic. It was something else. Something vital. Something biological. From his position on the ground, his faceplate retracted, Tony Stark could only stare. The arc reactor in his chest felt like a block of ice. His mind, which processed quantum physics for breakfast and designed world-changing tech on a whim, was drawing a complete and utter blank. "Friday?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Analysis. Now, scanning, boss." The AI's calm voice replied in his ear, a stark contrast to the chaos. "Subject is humanoid, approximately 1.7 meters tall, no discernible technology, exotic energy signatures, or known genetic markers. The energy output from the last kinetic event was anomalous. I am reading a biological energy source generating a force equivalent to a small tactical missile. My analysis is inconclusive. It appears to be, for lack of a better term, a superpower." "Yeah, no kidding," Tony muttered, pushing himself into a sitting position. He ignored the searing pain in his side. "Kid!" he yelled, his voice cracking. "I don't know if you're a friend, a foe, or a hallucination from a severe concussion, but who the hell are you and where the hell did you come from?" Deku heard the question, but it was background noise, a distant radio broadcast from a world he wasn't currently in. His entire being was focused on one thing, the giant purple threat in front of him. His analytical mind, the one that had filled countless notebooks with scribbled observations, was running at a fever pitch. He's strong, incredibly strong, Deku thought, his eyes darting back and forth between Thanos and the glowing gauntlet. Physical strength is a given. But the kick landed. It hurt him, or at least surprised him. But the real danger isn't his body. It's the glove. The quirk is the glove. He catalogued the evidence he'd witnessed. The purple stone projecting raw power. The blue stone manipulating space. The red stone altering reality itself. The fourth stone, yellow, had been used on the wizard, probing him somehow. For different abilities, each one on a scale that could rewrite the laws of physics. All for one could steal and combine quirks, but this was different. This was like holding the fundamental forces of the universe in your hand. His reliance is on the stones. He uses them for every major action. His own physical movements are powerful but relatively slow. He's a tank, not a fighter jet. My speed is the advantage. I can't let him think. I can't let him choose which stone to use. The target isn't him. The target is the gauntlet. A plan, desperate and razor-thin, began to form. He didn't answer Tony Stark. He didn't offer a dramatic one-liner. He acted. "One for all, full cowl, 30%. He whispered, the words a prayer to the power within him. The green lightning that had faded erupted back to life, no longer a faint crackle but a roaring aura of kinetic potential. The reddish dust at his feet was kicked up into a swirling vortex. In the low gravity of Titan, he felt lighter, faster, as if the world itself was trying to help him fly. He crouched, and then he launched. He didn't move in a straight line. That was suicide. He became a ricocheting bullet, a green comet streaking across the battlefield. He slammed his foot into a jagged piece of the crashed ship, the metal groaning under the force, and used it as a springboard, launching himself high into the violet sky. He was a streak of impossible motion, a living embodiment of kinetic energy. Thanos watched him come, his expression unchanging. He raised his gauntlet, the blue space stone beginning to glow. He intended to simply open a portal and shunt this new pest to the farthest, coldest corner of the galaxy. But Deku was already changing his trajectory. Mid-air, a whip of pure black energy shot from his arm, latching onto a towering rock spire 100 yards to his left. Black whip! He used the tendril to swing, altering his arc with impossible speed, coming at Thanos from the side. The Titan's attempt to use the space stone was a fraction of a second too slow. The portal opened where Deku had been, a shimmering blue tear in space that showed only empty, stardusted void. Deku closed the distance. He didn't aim for a knockout blow. He was testing, gathering data. He came in low, his body a spinning top of destructive force. Shoot style, St. Louis smash. He unleashed a furious volley of air pressure kicks, each one a contained explosion. They weren't meant to connect. They were a smoke screen of force, kicking up a massive cloud of red dust and debris, obscuring Thanos' vision. Through the maelstrom of his own making, Deku pressed the attack. He was a phantom in the dust, his green lightning the only clue to his position. He landed a sharp, powerful kick against the side of Thanos' knee. The Titan grunted, his leg buckling slightly. Deku was already gone, using the impact to propel himself away, landing another kick on Thanos' hip before vaulting over a piece of debris. It was a study in contrasts, a dance of mismatched philosophies. Thanos was a being of absolute, overwhelming force. When he attacked, it was with the finality of a collapsing star, using the stones to bend the universe to his will. Deku was a being of applied, pinpoint force. He was the surgeon's scalpel to Thanos' sledgehammer. He couldn't shatter the mountain, so he would chip away at it, piece by piece, until it collapsed. From the sidelines, the spectacle was breathtaking. Peter Parker had managed to pull himself into a sitting position, his head ringing. The nanites in his suit were working overtime to patch up his internal injuries, but all he could focus on was the blur of green lightning. Whoa, he breathed, the word full of a young hero's pure, unadulterated awe. He's so fast. He's moving faster than my spider sense can even track properly. He saw the way Deku moved, the way he used his entire body as a weapon, the fluid, acrobatic grace. It's like if Captain America had super speed and could kick holes in reality. Tony, having gotten to one knee, was watching with a strategist's sigh. His HUD was now a frantic scrawl of data it couldn't comprehend. Subject's velocity is exceeding Mach 2 in short bursts, Friday reported. The black, tendril-like extensions exhibit properties of both solid and energy. Origin unknown. Boss, I cannot reconcile this individual's energy expenditure with any known biological model. He should be consuming thousands of calories per second. His body should be tearing itself apart. Tell me about it, Tony grumbled, but his eyes were narrowed in thought. He saw the pattern. The kid wasn't trying to win a fistfight. He was harassing. He was distracting. He was creating openings. He was doing in seconds what they had been trying to do for minutes. Knocking the Titan off his game. Aboard the wreckage of the Benatar, the remaining Guardians watched. Okay, so Greeny's got moves, Peter Quill said, wincing as he clutched his bruised ribs. Part of him, the insecure part that always felt the need to be the coolest guy in the room, was jealous. The other, larger part was just glad that the giant purple monster was no longer focused on turning them into abstract art. Bit late to the party, though. Where was he 5 minutes ago when a brilliant plan was in motion? Drax, ever literal, was mesmerized. His own brute force approach had been utterly useless, but this was different. He attacks the giant head-on, yet he is never where the giant strikes, he bellowed, a rare grin splitting his face. His courage is magnificent. He fights like a Kree warrior of legend. Mantis, her antennae twitching, felt the emotions rolling off the battlefield. Thanos's were a cold, placid surface of certainty, now disturbed by ripples of surprise and irritation. But the boy was a storm. He is so determined, she whispered, her black eyes wide. So much resolve. But underneath it, there is so much sadness. A deep, deep well of it. Thanos had had enough of this game. The gnat had the strength of a battering ram, and its persistence was beginning to wear on his patience. Insolent child! He snarled. As Deku came in for another attack, Thanos didn't try to strike him. He stomped his foot. The power and space stones on his gauntlet flared simultaneously. The ground around him erupted in a 30-foot radius of violent purple energy. It wasn't a beam. It was a wave of pure, concussive force. Deku's danger sense shrieked a moment before the blast. There was no time to dodge, no time to escape the radius. He was caught. He crossed his arms in front of his face, the black whips instinctively wrapping around his forearms to form a makeshift shield. The wave hit him, and it felt like being tackled by a mountain. The force wasn't just physical, it carried the cosmic weight of the Power Stone. It slammed him back, sending him tumbling through the air like a ragdoll. He crashed through a thin wall of wreckage, the metal shrieking as it tore, and landed in a heap 100 feet away. He coughed, a cloud of red dust pluming from his lips. His ears were ringing, and his entire body felt like one giant bruise. That was just a casual, area of effect attack. That was the power he was up against. But as he looked up, he saw Thanos wasn't looking at him. The Titan was turning his attention back to the others. Back to the wizard, still pinned under the rubble. That was all the motivation Deku needed. He was on his feet in an instant, the pain a distant, unimportant signal. He began to move again, but this time, he added a new layer to his assault. F.A. Jean! He whispered, storing kinetic energy with each step. He weaved through the debris field, building and coiling power within his muscles. Thanos turned, sensing the approaching energy. He thrust his hand forward, the reality stone glowing a sinister red. Be still, he commanded. He didn't attack Deku. He attacked the ground beneath him. The solid, metallic earth turned to a thick, viscous liquid, like tar. Deku's next step plunged him ankle-deep into the muck, his momentum killed instantly. But he adapted. He had faced foes with quirks just as strange. Without missing a beat, he fired black whip tendrils into the solid ground outside the affected area, using them to pull himself free. He became an aerial combatant, swinging through the forest of wreckage, never touching the ground. He was Spider-Man and Tarzan rolled into one, a green pendulum of righteous fury. It was in this moment, watching the boy adapt with impossible speed to a fundamental change in reality, that Dr. Strange understood. Pinned under a collapsed pillar, his body aching but his mind sharp as ever, Stephen Strange was not just watching a fight. He was witnessing a cosmic impossibility. The moment the boy had appeared, Strange's mind, which had been locked on the single, narrow path to victory he'd foreseen, had been thrown into chaos. He had peered into the future, letting the time stone show him millions of variations of the coming conflict. 14,605 to be exact. He had seen worlds where they fought harder, where Quill controlled his temper, where Thor had aimed for the head. He had seen them all end in failure. All except one. One single, solitary timeline that led to victory, a path that required sacrifice, loss, and a 5-year wait. It was a bitter pill, but it was the only cure. Until now, this boy, this green comet, was not in any of them. Not as a hero, not as a villain, not as a bystander. He simply did not exist in their reality's causal chain. The time stone could chart every possible future born from its own timeline, every branching path, every quantum possibility. But it could not, would not, be able to predict an element introduced from outside the system entirely. A variable inserted into the equation from a completely different book of mathematics. Strange's mind raced, reevaluating everything. The boy's power was immense, but it was his spirit that was the true anomaly. He fought with a desperate, selfless heroism that was both reckless and incredibly pure. He wasn't fighting to win, he was fighting to save. It was a subtle but crucial distinction. The one path Strange had seen was no longer guaranteed. The arrival of this boy had torn up the map. The future was no longer a fixed point he had to navigate towards. It was a terrifying, exhilarating blank page. The odds were no longer 1 in 14 million. The odds were now unknown. For the first time since he had given up the time stone, Dr. Strange felt a flicker of something he had thought long extinguished. It wasn't certainty. It was hope, a wild, terrifying, and utterly unpredictable hope. This boy was the universe's ultimate wild card. He is the variable, Strange whispered to the dust, a slow, dawning smile touching his lips. The one thing he could never account for. Back in the heart of the fight, Deku was learning. Every move Thanos made, every stone he used, was another line of data in his mental notebook. He's favoring the power, space, and reality stones. They have the widest applications in a direct fight. He's using them defensively now, trying to control the battlefield rather than attack me directly. He's trying to nullify my speed. Deku used another black whip swing to fling himself high above the battlefield. For a moment, he hung there at the apex of his arc, a perfect vantage point. He saw the whole scene, Thanos standing in the center, a patient god swatting at a fly, Tony and the others, watching, waiting for an opening, the wizard, still trapped. An opening. I have to make one. He angled his body downward, preparing for a dive bomb attack. He saw Thanos raise the gauntlet, the reality stone glowing again. He was going to turn Deku into a cloud of butterflies or a block of lead, but Deku had the vestiges. He had their experience. Nana's voice, calm and clear in his mind, don't fight his power head-on, Izuku. Make him fight himself. He twisted in midair. Instead of a dive bomb, he fired 2 tendrils of black whip, not at Thanos, but at the massive, curved hull of the broken Q-ship behind the Titan. The tendrils latched on, and with a roar of effort Deku pulled. He wasn't trying to move the ship. He was using it as an anchor. He became the focal point of a massive slingshot. Thanos, expecting an attack from the air, was momentarily confused by the boy's bizarre maneuver. That moment was all Deku needed. Using the tension in the black whip tendrils, he launched himself horizontally, a living cannonball skimming just inches above the ground. He was a blur of motion, faster than anything he had achieved before, the stored kinetic energy of Fa gene combining with the slingshot momentum. He wasn't aiming for the gauntlet this time. He was aiming lower. Manchester. Smash! He delivered a flying, double-footed axe kick aimed directly at Thanos' shin. It was a dirty move, a fighter's move, not a duelist's. The impact was thunderous. The unarmored part of Thanos' leg buckled under the focused, astronomical force. For the first time, a genuine cry of pain was torn from the mad Titan's throat. He staggered, his balance completely broken, and dropped to one knee. The connection was broken. The spell was shattered. The opening was there. Now! Deku screamed, his voice raw, pouring every ounce of his remaining stamina into the word. It was the signal they had been waiting for. Tony Stark's armor flared to life, and he shot forward. Peter Parker, propelled by a surge of adrenaline, web-zipped towards the kneeling Titan. The Guardians charged. But the chapter was not over. Thanos was on one knee, his leg throbbing, but his eyes burned with a new light. The intrigue was gone. The annoyance was gone. All that remained was cold, absolute fury. This child, this insignificant speck, had not only evaded him, had not only disrupted his plan, but had actually hurt him. He looked at the approaching heroes, then his eyes locked onto the green comet that had brought him low. Deku was panting, his legs trembling from the strain, but his eyes were still blazing with defiance. Thanos' lips curled back into a venomous snarl. He didn't need to be standing to use the stones. You have spirit, child, Thanos growled, the gauntlet beginning to glow with the light of all 4 captured stones. Let's see if it can withstand infinity. The opening Izuku had carved out of the fabric of the battle was infinitesimally small, a crack of daylight in a sealed tomb. But it was enough. Hope, once extinguished on the desolate plains of Titan, flared back to life, hot and desperate. Go, go, go! Tony Stark's voice was a tinny roar through his helmet's external speakers. Nanites swarmed over his suit, forming a massive battering ram on one arm as he rocketed towards the kneeling Thanos. He wasn't just an Avenger now. He was a father figure, and the sight of Peter, battered but back in the fight, filled him with a protective fury. Peter Parker, fueled by adrenaline and the sheer awe-inspiring sight of Deku's assault, swung in on a web line, his movements a frantic, desperate dance. On your left, he yelled, a callback to a hero he admired, a mantra for a fight he couldn't possibly comprehend. He shot a volley of electrified webs aimed directly at the gauntlet, hoping to short-circuit something. From the other side, the Guardians of the Galaxy charged. Star-Lord, his face a mask of grim determination, slid across the metallic dust, firing his quad blasters. Drax roared a guttural war cry, his twin knives gripped tight, ready to avenge his family. Mantis, hanging back with Nebula, pressed her palms together, her brow furrowed in concentration, preparing to try and force sleep upon the Titan once they got close enough. It was a beautiful, chaotic, and utterly doomed assault. Thanos, kneeling but far from defeated, watched them come. His eyes, burning with cold fury, were fixed on Izuku, the source of this renewed, futile resistance. But he would deal with the gnat later. First, he would remind these lesser beings of the futility of their struggle. The stones on his gauntlet pulsed. The red of reality. The blue of space. The electrified webs Peter shot sizzled into a shower of iridescent, harmless rose petals that floated gently to the ground. The energy blasts from Star-Lord's guns transformed into a swarm of squawking, rubbery chickens that flapped comically before vanishing. The very ground beneath Tony Stark's flight path turned into a gelatinous, non-Newtonian fluid, causing his trajectory to wobble as his boot thrusters struggled to find purchase in the warping physics. It was all happening in the space of a single second. An exercise in casual, contemptuous power. But they had one advantage now. One they hadn't had before. They had the green comet. Deku saw the assault faltering before it even began. He saw the flicker of the reality stone. He didn't have time to shout a warning. He only had time to act. His legs screamed in protest, the muscles feeling like frayed ropes, but he ignored them. One for All answered his desperate call, surging through him not as a roar, but as a steady, thrumming current. He pushed off, a blur of green. He wasn't aiming for Thanos anymore. He was aiming for his new, temporary allies. He intercepted Tony first. Just as Stark's flight was destabilized, a black tendril of energy shot out and wrapped around his armored torso. Black Whip, Deku grunted, planting his feet on a solid patch of ground and acting as a living anchor. The tendril pulled taut, yanking Tony out of the reality-warped goo and stabilizing his flight path. "Kid, you've got more tricks than a Vegas magician!" Tony exclaimed, his HUD flashing with alerts about the unknown energy signature enveloping him. He recalibrated his thrusters and re-engaged, now flying in a tight, protective spiral around Deku's position. Next, Deku's attention snapped to Spider-Man. Peter had landed and was trying to dodge a backhand from Thanos, who, despite being on one knee, was still lethally fast up close. Deku saw the blow coming. He couldn't reach Peter in time. So he did the next best thing. He stomped his foot down, channeling a precise burst of One for All. Air Force. A targeted blast of pressurized air, invisible and moving at the speed of sound, slammed into Peter's side. It wasn't a gentle nudge. It felt like being hit by a car. Peter was knocked off his feet, tumbling away from the arc of Thanos' swing, which passed through the empty air with enough force to create a sonic boom. "Whoa! Thanks. I think," Peter yelled, shaking his head to clear the ringing in his ears. He was bruised, but he was alive. For a fleeting moment, a strange, impossible synergy was born on that alien battlefield. It wasn't planned. It wasn't drilled. It was pure instinct, a desperate harmony conducted by a boy from another universe. Deku became the linchpin, the hyper-fast sheepdog herding his bewildered flock. He was everywhere at once. When Thanos used the Space Stone to try and teleport Drax into the stratosphere, Deku was there, using Black Whip to snag the destroyer's ankle and drag him back to the ground. When Thanos conjured a wall of fire with the Power Stone to block Star-Lord, Deku was there, using a Delaware Smash to create a shockwave of air that parted the flames like a curtain, giving Quill a clear shot. The fight transformed. It was no longer a series of one-on-one confrontations. It became a frantic shell game. Deku was the distraction, the primary target that Thanos couldn't ignore, his sheer speed and unpredictability forcing the Titan to focus on him. This gave the others the precious seconds they needed to mount their own attacks. Tony swooped in, his repulsors firing in precise bursts at the gauntlet's joints. Peter, now wise to the Reality Stone's tricks, stopped shooting webs and started throwing massive chunks of debris, solid, tangible objects that were harder to transmute on the fly. Drax, with a renewed fury, managed to get in close and sink one of his knives into the unarmored part of Thanos' thigh, earning a roar of pain and a swift, brutal kick that sent him flying. It was working. They were actually, impossibly, landing hits. They were making the Mad Titan bleed. This is insane, Quill shouted over the comms, ducking behind a pillar as a blast of purple energy vaporized the spot where he'd been standing. Who is this kid? Is he one of yours, Stark? Never seen him before in my life. Tony shot back, unleashing a torrent of micro-missiles that Thanos had to swat away with a wave of his hand. But I'm thinking of adopting him. Doctor Strange, still pinned, watched the symphony of chaos with a clinical, almost detached fascination. This was not strategy. This was improvised jazz on a battlefield, and at its heart was the boy, Izuku, whose every action seemed to be dictated by a single, unwavering principle: protect everyone else. He wasn't just fighting Thanos, he was actively shielding the others, putting himself in the path of danger, creating openings, covering retreats. It was reckless. It was inefficient. It was profoundly, breathtakingly heroic. Strange realized he was watching a living, breathing embodiment of the Hippocratic oath he had once taken: first, do no harm. The boy had simply expanded its definition to include let no harm come to others, even at great cost to myself. Thanos finally rose to his full height, his legs still aching, the knife wound in his thigh bleeding purple blood. The flicker of irritation had now grown into a cold, burning rage. The game was over. These creatures, this entire universe, were too stubborn, too chaotic. They didn't deserve his mercy. They deserved only oblivion. But first, he would deal with the source of this infuriating hope. His eyes locked onto Deku, who was momentarily perched on a high piece of wreckage, catching his breath. Thanos raised the gauntlet. He wasn't going to use one stone. He was going to use a combination. The space stone glowed blue. The reality stone glowed red. He thrust his hand forward, and the very fabric of space around Deku seemed to shatter like a mirror. Not one portal, but hundreds, opened up in a sphere around him. Simultaneously, the reality stone activated, and through each portal, a twisted, nightmarish version of the battlefield bled through. From one portal came a torrent of lava, from another, a swarm of metallic, insect-like creatures. From a third, a beam of pure, searing cold. It was a cage of localized dimensions, a personal hell designed to overwhelm and destroy. Kid, look out! Tony yelled, but he was too far away to help. Deku's danger sense went from a sharp spike of pain to a full-blown, deafening siren in his skull. He was surrounded, trapped. The attacks were coming from every conceivable angle. He didn't have time to dodge. He only had time to endure. He wrapped himself in Black Whip, the dark tendrils forming a dense, layered cocoon around his body. He braced himself. The lava hit first, and the outer layers of Black Whip sizzled and dissolved, but held. Then the cold beam, which made the tendrils brittle, but they held. Then the swarm of creatures, which began tearing and biting at the shield. Inside the cocoon, it was chaos. Deku felt the impacts, the temperature swings, the sheer cosmic violence of the assault. But his mind was clear, his resolve absolute. He remembered his training with all might. He remembered the fight against Muscular, being pushed beyond his limits. He remembered the weight of the world during the war. This was just another wall to break through. This is his power, Deku thought, his teeth gritted. He is trying to overwhelm me. To make me feel hopeless. But he doesn't understand. A hero's job is to be hopeful, even when there's no hope left. He felt a new power surge within him. Not from the core of One for All, but from its periphery. It was the fourth user's quirk, FA gene. He was building up kinetic energy, not from movement, but from the absorption of the impacts themselves. The cocoon of Black Whip was acting like a capacitor, taking the force of Thanos' assault and feeding it directly into his muscles. Thanos watched the black sphere tremble and smoke under the barrage, confident that whatever was inside was being torn to shreds. He turned his attention back to the others, preparing to finish them off. And then the sphere exploded. With a roar that was pure, unadulterated defiance, Deku unleashed the stored energy. FA Gene Turbo, Detroit Smash. He didn't punch. He erupted. A 360-degree blast of kinetic force exploded outwards from his body. It wasn't an Air Force attack, it was a physical shockwave, a statement of absolute denial. The dimensional portals flickered and shattered. The lava, the cold, the creatures, all were blasted back into the nothingness from whence they came. Deku stood in the center of the blast radius, his suit steaming, his body trembling violently from the strain. He was alive. He was still standing. A stunned silence fell over the battlefield once more. The heroes stared, slack-jawed. Tony's HUD was just a flashing screen of question marks. Thanos turned back, his eyes wide with genuine disbelief. The child had not only survived an attack that would have atomized the small moon, but had turned it back on itself. He had taken the power of 2 Infinity Stones and used it as fuel. This was not a matter of strength or speed. This was something else. A fundamental misunderstanding of the laws of nature as Thanos knew them. It was in this moment of shock that Thanos finally did what Deku had been subconsciously dreading. He looked at Deku not as a fighter, but as a curiosity to be dissected. The yellow Mind Stone on the gauntlet began to glow. It wasn't an attack. It was a probe. A silent, invisible needle of psychic energy that lanced across the distance and pierced Deku's mind. Thanos wanted to know what this creature was. Where it came from. What strange power allowed it to defy the infinite. Deku gasped, his body going rigid. He felt an overwhelming presence in his head. It was ancient, vast, and impossibly intelligent. It rummaged through his thoughts, his memories, his very being with a cold, detached curiosity. He saw flashes of his life, his mother's worried face, All Might's shining smile, the halls of UA, the faces of Class 1A, the horror of the war, the burden of his secret. It was all laid bare, an open book for the Titan to read. Thanos' eyes widened further. The images were alien. The language, the culture, the very concept of quirks. It was all from a world that was not in his universal registry, a reality completely separate from his own. The boy was an anomaly, a castaway from another existence. But that wasn't what truly shocked him. As the Mind Stone delved deeper, past Deku's personal memories, it touched the core of his power. It touched one for all, and it found not one mind, but a multitude. What is this? Thanos whispered, his voice laced with awe. The Mind Stone recoiled as if it had touched a live wire. It had brushed against a legion. It felt the fiery will of Nana Shimura. It felt the stoic resolve of Daigoro Banjo. It felt the cunning intellect of Haikyuu Shinomori. It felt the foundational defiance of Yoichi Shigaraki. It felt 8 distinct, powerful consciousnesses, all bound together, residing within the soul of this one boy. A chorus of heroic spirits. A legacy of power passed down not through genetics, but through will alone. Thanos stumbled back, his mind reeling from the psychic feedback. He had used the Soul Stone before. He knew the nature of souls. But this was different. This wasn't a collection of souls. It was a single, unified soul forged from the fragments of many. A living lineage, a legion of souls within one body, Thanos said, his voice a mixture of astonishment and something else, hunger. A power passed down through generations. Fascinating. He looked at Deku with new eyes. He was no longer a gnat. He was a prize. A biological and spiritual marvel unlike anything he had ever encountered. That power, that legacy, it was wasted on a sentimental child who fought for lost causes. In his hands it could be a tool to enforce his new order. A power to maintain the balance he so desperately craved. You fight with the spirit of a true warrior, child, Thanos said, his voice taking on a dangerously persuasive tone. He began to walk forward, his limp forgotten. But you are like an infant swinging a star-forged sword. You cannot comprehend the scale of my purpose. The universe is finite. Its resources finite. If life is left unchecked, it will consume itself and perish. I am the only one with the will to enact the necessary correction. A small price to pay for salvation. He was trying to reason with him. He was trying to justify his cosmic genocide. Deku, his head throbbing from the mental intrusion, felt a wave of nausea. He had heard this kind of logic before. Stain, with his twisted view of heroism. Overhaul, who saw people as tools to be disassembled and reassembled. Shigaraki, who wanted to destroy everything just to see it burn. They were all just different verses of the same horrifying song. The psalm of a tyrant who believed his will was more important than the lives of others. You're wrong, Deku gasped, his voice shaking but firm. There's no salvation in murder. A hero's job is to save everyone they can. Not to balance the books by killing half of them. Every single life is precious. Every single one matters. The conviction in his voice was absolute. It was the core of his being, the foundational belief upon which his entire identity as a hero was built. Thanos sighed, a deep, weary sound. The look of a philosopher king returned to his face, tinged with a deep, profound disappointment. So much passion. So much potential. Wasted. You are still too young to understand. You see only the individual trees, not the forest that is dying of thirst. He stopped walking. He was 20 feet away. I offered you understanding. You have chosen defiance. So be it. The fifth stone on the gauntlet, the orange soul stone, began to glow with a soft, menacing light. It pulsed in time with Thanos' heartbeat. Deku's danger sense didn't just scream. It went silent. It was a silence more terrifying than any alarm, a flat line of cosmic dread. He felt a coldness that had nothing to do with temperature. It was a spiritual cold, a sense of being seen, truly seen, by something ancient and predatory. He felt the soul stone reach for him. It wasn't a physical attack. It was a pull on his very essence, on the core of One for All. He felt the vestiges recoil, their unified presence trembling under the cosmic scrutiny. It felt like a giant, invisible hand was plunging into his chest and closing around his heart. Thanos' voice was a low, chilling whisper that seemed to echo directly in Deku's soul. That power you carry, a symphony of souls. I will enjoy studying it. Once I have plucked it from your unworthy body. The pressure intensified. The green lightning around Deku flickered and died. His connection to the core of One for All began to fray. He felt the spirits of the vestiges being pulled, stretched, threatened with erasure. He was losing. Not his body, but his soul. And with it, the hope of this world, and his own. The impossible equation had been solved, and he was the one being subtracted. The air over the shattered remnants of what was once a city block tasted of ozone and pulverized concrete. A moment's lull had descended upon the battlefield, a strange, breathless pause in the symphony of destruction. It wasn't a truce, nor was it born of exhaustion, at least, not on one side. The heroes of two worlds stood panting, bruised, and bleeding, their greatest efforts having amounted to little more than a violent ballet that had left their opponent untouched. Iron Man's repulses whined, struggling to cool. Captain America's shield, a miracle of vibranium, was scarred with energy burns that should have been impossible. Thor, the god of thunder, leaned heavily on Stormbreaker, his chest heaving with ragged breaths. And among them, Izuku Midoriya, his costume torn and his body a road map of screaming aches, felt a familiar, cold dread creeping into his heart. It was the same feeling he'd had facing All for One, the chilling recognition of a power that operated on a plane entirely beyond his own. They had hit him with everything. Thor's lightning, a force that could level mountains, had been casually deflected by the glowing purple stone on the gauntlet. Iron Man's arsenal of lasers and missiles had detonated against the blue stone's shimmering spatial distortions, folding into nothingness. Hulk had been swatted aside like an insect. Every coordinated attack, every desperate gambit, had failed. Thanos stood in the center of the crater his arrival had created, his posture relaxed, almost serene. He wasn't even breathing heavily. His gaze swept over the assembled heroes, a flicker of something that wasn't malice, but almost disappointment. His eyes, deep-set and ancient, finally settled on Midoriya. He saw the crackling green energy, the sheer, untamed power that burned in the boy. He saw the spirit behind it, a will that refused to break, and he tilted his head. You! Thanos rumbled, his voice a gravelly baritone that seemed to emanate from the very earth. There is a fire in you. A storm of conviction. Of all the creatures on this blighted world, you fight with the fury of a dying star. Why? Deku flinched at being addressed directly. He tightened his fists, ignoring the sharp protest of his strained muscles. We're heroes! It's our job to stop villains like you who want to hurt innocent people. The words sounded so simple, so pure in his own mind, the core tenet of his entire existence. A low chuckle escaped Thanos' lips, a dry, humorless sound. Villain? He took a step forward, the ground trembling slightly. The heroes tensed, preparing for another onslaught, but he simply held up a placating, gauntlet hand. I am not a villain. Your narrow perception prevents you from seeing the truth of my purpose. I am a savior. Stark's faceplate snapped shut. A savior? Right. And I'm the Easter Bunny. You've carved a path of death across the galaxy. We've seen the reports. The devastation of Xander, the cleansing of Zenhobari. You call that salvation? A necessary correction, Thanos stated, his voice utterly devoid of doubt. He turned his gaze to the sky, as if looking at something far beyond their planet. Look around you. This world, like my own, teems with life. It grows, it consumes, it expands without thought or restraint. You breed, you build, you devour your resources, tipping the scales of existence into chaos. You are a plague driving your own world to ruin, and you are blind to it. He began to pace slowly, his heavy armored boots crunching on rubble. My home planet Titan was a paradise. We were a civilization of thinkers, of scientists. But we were too successful. Our population swelled, our resources dwindled. I proposed a solution, a simple, fair, and merciful one. His eyes met Deku's again, a cold, clinical light shining within them. I offered to randomly, dispassionately eliminate half of all life. The rich, the poor, the powerful, the meek. A lottery of survival, free from bias. With one act, our world would be restored. Our children could be born into a world of plenty, free from the suffering of starvation and war. Deku's blood ran cold. The casual way he spoke of it, the mathematical detachment, it was more horrifying than any villain's cackle or boastful threat. You wanted to murder half your own people? They called me a madman, Thanos said, a flicker of ancient pain in his voice. My solution was rejected. And so I watched my world die. I watched my people starve. I watched them tear each other apart for the last scraps of sustenance. I alone survived to witness their end, to know that I was right. He stopped pacing, his colossal form casting a long, dark shadow over the heroes. I will not allow the rest of the universe to share that same fate. From Xander to Sakaar, I have brought my solution to countless worlds. I have given them the gift of balance. I have given their children a future. The infinity stones on his gauntlet pulsed with a soft, ambient light, each one a universe of power. With these, he said, raising the gauntlet, I can extend my mercy to all of creation. With a snap of my fingers, half of all life in the universe will simply cease to exist. The remaining half will know only full bellies and clear skies. It is not suffering. It is not hatred. It is salvation. The word hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Salvation. The concept shattered against the core of Izuku Midoriya's soul. Everything went silent. The sounds of distant sirens, the groans of stressed metal, the very thrum of his own power. It all faded away, replaced by the deafening roar of Thanos' philosophy echoing in his mind. He saw Ares' face, her silver hair and wide, innocent red eyes. He saw her smile, the first genuine smile she'd ever had after a lifetime of torment. He saw Koda, the angry little boy on the cliffside, his heart walled off by grief, finally breaking down in tears of gratitude and relief. He saw the faces of his classmates, his mother, the countless civilians he had sworn to protect, the ones he had already saved and the ones he hadn't met yet. Thanos' logic was the argument of a devil cloaked in the robes of a philosopher. He spoke of balance, but it was the balance of a graveyard. He spoke of mercy, but it was the mercy of a guillotine. To him, these were not lives. They were numbers on a cosmic ledger. Line items to be deleted for the sake of efficiency. The carefree, almost academic nature of the fight, the thrill of facing a new, powerful opponent, the challenge of working with these strange new heroes, evaporated like mist in a furnace. This wasn't a contest. It wasn't a battle. It was a stand against the abyss. This purple-skinned monster wasn't just a threat to this city, or this planet. He was a threat to everything, to every laugh, every tear, every hope, every dream on every world spinning in the silent darkness of space. The sheer, incomprehensible scale of his goal pressed down on Deku, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. It was the weight of half a universe. He felt the crushing, suffocating responsibility settle onto his shoulders, heavier than any building, heavier than any mountain. He was not just fighting for his friends, he was fighting for trillions of souls who didn't even know his name, who didn't know they were in danger. And in that moment of terrible clarity, Izuku Midoriya's heroic resolve, forged in the fires of countless battles and tempered by endless sacrifice, began to change. Inside the luminous, ethereal plane of One for All, a tempest erupted. The consciousness of the previous users, usually a calm sea of wisdom and memory, was thrown into utter chaos. They felt what Izuku felt, saw what he saw, and heard the mad Titan's gospel of genocide. Unforgivable! The voice of the second user, a man of war and shadows, crackled with a rage that vibrated through the very fabric of the quirk. This is not a conqueror. This is a plague, the scale of it. The third user whispered, his own pragmatic and often grim worldview completely overwhelmed. To possess such power and use it for such a sterile, monstrous purpose. It is an obscenity. Daigoro Banjo, the fifth user, felt Black Whip lashing out from his spectral form, tendrils of pure energy writhing in fury. He talks about saving lives by ending them. It's the logic of a broken god, and the sixth user, cloaked in his perpetual haze, felt smokescreen churn around him. He feels no joy in it. That's what's so terrifying. He believes he is righteous, but it was Yoichi Shigaraki, the first user, who felt the most profound horror. He saw in Thanos the same cold, absolute certainty that had driven his own brother, all for one. But where his brother's goal was selfish, the accumulation of power for its own sake, this was something far more insidious. It was tyranny disguised as altruism. It was the ultimate expression of control, the belief that one being had the right to decide the fate of all others. It was his brother's sin, magnified to the scale of the cosmos. Izuku! Yoichi's voice was a strained whisper, filled with a terror he hadn't felt since his own lifetime. This is not a man you can reason with. His soul is a fortress of self-righteousness. There is no compromise with this extinction. Through the swirling storm of their collective fury and despair, one voice cut through, clear and strong as a clarion call. It was the voice of Nana Shimura, the seventh user, her spirit burning with an indomitable light. She saw the crushing weight descending upon the young man who was not only her successor's successor, but a boy who embodied the very best of their shared legacy. She felt his heart, not breaking, but hardening under the impossible pressure. Her consciousness surged forward, her hand, made of memory and light, reaching for Izuku's struggling soul. Izuku! Her voice echoed not in the vestige plane, but directly in the forefront of Midoriya's mind. It was as clear as if she were standing right beside him. Listen to me. Don't let the horror paralyze you. Don't let the weight crush you. Let it anchor you. He is wrong. That is the only truth that matters now. All life is precious. The struggle, the suffering, the joy, the chaos, it is all worth saving. You are a hero, Izuku Midoriya. You don't get to buckle under the weight. You have to bear it. Her voice softened, but lost none of its intensity. It became the plea of a mentor, a grandmother, a fellow hero who knew the cost of their calling. Save them, Izuku. You have to save them. Her words were a spark in a powder keg. The fear, the horror, the crushing weight, it did not vanish. Instead, it was transmuted. The unbearable pressure compressed the soft coal of his determination, forging it into something new. Something unbreakable. Something absolute. An unbreakable diamond of heroic will. On the battlefield, the change was instantaneous and terrifying. The soft, hopeful green light of One for All that usually wrapped around Izuku Midoriya like a gentle aura exploded. It became a raging, emerald inferno, a vortex of power that cracked the very ground beneath his feet. Stones and debris levitated around him, caught in the gravity of his newfound resolve. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with an oppressive, suffocating pressure that made the other heroes, even Thor, take an involuntary step back. Deku lifted his head, and the eyes that met Thanos's were no longer the wide, emotional eyes of a boy. They were the burning, focused cores of a star on the verge of supernova. Tears streamed down his face, not of sadness, but of pure, incandescent rage and grief for the trillions of lives held in the balance. "You're wrong," he whispered, his voice dangerously quiet. Then he roared, a sound of primal, righteous fury that ripped through the air. "You are wrong!" The emerald lightning intensified, arcing violently from his body. Red veins of power pulsed through the green, the raw energy of one for all straining against the limits of his body. He could feel it, the tearing sensation in his muscles, the hairline fractures beginning to spiderweb across his bones. He knew the cost. And for the first time, he didn't care. The cost was irrelevant. One for all. The heroes heard him grunt, his voice strained with unimaginable effort. The power output, a feeling they had come to recognize, surged past anything he had displayed before. It blew past 20%, bypassed 30% without hesitation. It screamed past the theoretical limits he had worked so hard to achieve. 45%! If his previous attacks were bullets, this was a cannonball. If they were lightning, this was the sun. He vanished from his spot, the resulting sonic boom shattering the windows of every remaining building for a mile. He didn't just move, he weaponized motion itself. Thanos, for the first time, looked surprised. The boy's speed was an order of magnitude greater than before. He barely had time to raise his gauntlet arm before Deku was on him. The first blow wasn't a punch, it was a kinetic event. A 45% Detroit smash aimed not at Thanos' head, but at his center of mass. The impact didn't create a shockwave. It created a hemisphere of concussive force that blasted a crater 30 feet deep into the ground. Thanos slid back, his armored boots carving deep trenches into the bedrock. A grunt of actual effort escaped his lips. Before he could recover, Deku was already in motion. Tendrils of black whip, now glowing with a malevolent emerald light, erupted from his arms. They weren't just for grappling anymore. They were bludgeons, whips of solid energy that cracked against Thanos' armor with the sound of thunder. "You don't get to decide!" Deku screamed, his voice raw. He used float to launch himself into the air, appearing above Thanos in an instant. Black whip tendrils wrapped around the Titan's shoulders and arms, anchoring him in place. Thanos roared, flexing his immense strength. The tendrils strained, groaning under the pressure, but they held. They held just long enough. Izuku Midoriya put every ounce of his newfound power, every vestige's desperate hope, every bit of his own soul into one singular point. He cocked his fist back, the green energy of one for all concentrating into a blindingly bright point around his knuckles. The bones in his arms screamed, a chorus of agony promising a terrible price for this act. He ignored them. He saw Ares smile. He heard Nana's voice. He felt the weight of half a universe. St. Louis! He descended like a meteor, a streak of green and black fury. Smash! The blow landed squarely on the side of Thanos' helmeted head. For a fraction of a second, there was no sound. All the kinetic energy, the raw, universe-altering power of One for All, was transferred in an instant of perfect, terrible silence. Then, the world broke. A thunderclap erupted that was so loud, it deafened everyone for a moment. A shockwave of emerald light and superheated air vaporized the rubble around them, blasting heroes and debris alike hundreds of feet away. When the light faded, the silence that followed was one of pure, unadulterated shock. The heroes, picking themselves up, their ears ringing, stared at the scene in disbelief. Deku was on the ground, his right arm bent at an unnatural angle, smoke pouring from the raw, mangled flesh. He was trembling violently, his body finally succumbing to the horrific backlash of his own power. But he was looking up. And so were they. Thanos was still standing, but he was staggered. His head was bowed slightly. And on the side of his ornate, golden Yaryu helmet, a web of deep, undeniable cracks radiated from a single point of impact. As they watched, a small, triangular piece of the alien metal, something that had withstood the full force of a star, broke free and clattered onto the ground. Stunned silence. Tony Stark's HUD flickered, trying to process the impossible energy readings. Thor, who had seen his father fight cosmic entities, stared with wide eyes. Captain America, a man who had seen living gods and super soldiers, felt a surge of pure, unadulterated awe. No one had done that. No one had been able to physically harm the Mad Titan in such a definitive way. They had thrown planets at him, and he had shrugged them off. But this boy, this child from another world, had just cracked the uncrackable. Deku pushed himself to one knee, his body a symphony of agony. He could feel the bones in his arm grinding against each other, a sickening, wet sound. He could feel the ligaments torn, the muscles shredded. But as he looked at the damage he had inflicted, as he saw the first sign of vulnerability on the face of a god, he felt no pain. He only felt the crushing weight on his shoulders. And for the first time, he felt he was strong enough to bear it. The clatter of the falling piece of Yaryu was a sound more profound than any explosion that had preceded it. In the ringing silence that followed, that small, metallic tink echoed like a death knell for the impossible. It was the sound of a god bleeding. The heroes, scattered across the blasted landscape, stared with a collective, suspended breath. Their minds, conditioned by the absolute futility of their own efforts, struggled to reconcile what they had just witnessed. They had hurled thunder and lasers, vibranium and raw gamma-fueled rage at the mad titan to no effect. Yet this boy, this child wrapped in a maelstrom of green lightning, had landed a single, devastating blow that had achieved what they could not. He had left a mark. Izuku Midoriya remained on one knee, his body a war zone of conflicting signals. The shredded muscles and pulverized bones in his right arm screamed with a white-hot, nauseating agony that would have rendered any normal person unconscious. But the sight of the cracked helmet, the tangible proof that this cosmic entity was not invincible, was a balm more potent than any painkiller. It was a single drop of hope in an ocean of despair. Thanos slowly raised a hand, his massive, gauntlet fingers tracing the jagged fissure in his helmet. He felt the rough, unnatural edge of the break. He was not in pain. The blow had been jarring, a concussive force that had rattled him in a way he had not experienced in centuries, but it was the implication, not the sensation, that truly registered. For the first time on this backward, insignificant planet, he felt a flicker of something other than placid, paternalistic resolve. It was annoyance. The faint, almost academic curiosity he had held for the boy's strange power had curdled. The child's emotional, reckless outburst was an impurity in the sterile equation of his grand design. It was inefficient. It was messy. It was a sentimental tantrum that had dared to mar the vessel of a universal savior. The game, a contest he had been patiently and benevolently indulging, was over. He lowered his hand, his gaze falling upon Midoriya. The air around him seemed to grow colder, the ambient light dimming as if drained by his very presence. The deep, philosophical calm in his eyes was gone, replaced by the flat, merciless resolve of a surgeon about to excise a tumor. "You have power, child." Thanos' voice was a low, chilling rumble, stripped of its earlier, professorial tone. "But you wield it like a club. A tool of passion and fury. You cannot see the grand tapestry, so you try to tear a hole in it. A pointless gesture. We'll do more than tear it!" Tony Stark's voice crackled through his external speakers, his bravado a thin shield for his own astonishment. He landed beside Captain America, repulsors flaring. "We're just getting started." Taking the cracked helmet as their cue, the heroes surged. This was the moment, the opening they had been desperate for. Thor let out a bellowing war cry, summoning a bolt of lightning from the sky that was thicker and brighter than anything before. It struck Stormbreaker, and he unleashed it not as a bolt, but as a solid, searing beam of pure energy. At the same time, Iron Man diverted all power to his chest uni-beam, firing a torrent of plasma. Captain America hurled his shield, angling it to ricochet and strike Thanos from the side, a distraction for the main assault. It was a perfect, coordinated attack, designed to capitalize on a staggered foe. It was utterly useless. Thanos didn't even bother to deflect. He simply closed his fist. The purple power stone flared, and a wave of pure, annihilating force erupted outwards. It didn't block the attacks, it unmade them. Thor's lightning dissolved into harmless static. Iron Man's unibeam was snuffed out like a candle flame. Cap's shield, caught in the wave, was sent tumbling end over end, crashing into a ruined skyscraper half a mile away. The heroes themselves were blasted back, their offensive shattered before it had even begun. Thanos' cold gaze never left Deku. He had decided on the boy's fate. This chaotic variable needed to be removed from the equation. Permanently. He raised the gauntlet, and the reality stone, the shimmering red gem, began to glow with an ethereal, liquid light. "You fight for the sanctity of one reality," Thanos stated, his voice a dead monotone. "Let us see how you fare against an infinite number of them." For Deku, the world fractured. It didn't explode or shake. It simply broke. The sky, the rubble, the horrified faces of the other heroes, they all cracked like a mirror struck by a hammer. The cracks spread, spiderwebbing across his vision, and then the shards began to move. They twisted, rotated, and reformed. The ground beneath him became a kaleidoscope of crystalline planes, each one reflecting a different, distorted version of the battlefield. One shard showed a world where the city was pristine, another where it was a sea of fire. A third showed Captain America's shield lying broken in a dozen pieces. He was no longer in the city. He was trapped in a cage of possibility, a prison of perception. The mirror dimension. "Where?" he gasped, pushing himself to his feet, his functioning arm held defensively in front of him. The landscape was a dizzying, nauseating cubist painting of their reality. Shards of glass-like planes stretched into an impossible sky, reflecting twisted, monstrous versions of his own face. From one of the larger planes, a reflection of All Might, skeletal and gaunt, stepped out. Its voice was a hollow, mocking echo. "You can't save them, young Midoriya. You can't even save yourself." From another, Eri appeared, her eyes black and empty. "Why did you let him hurt me?" she whispered, her voice multiplying as 1,000 reflections of her sad, accusatory face appeared all around him. "No, this isn't real!" Deku yelled, but the emotional blow landed nonetheless. He knew it was an illusion, but the poison seeped in. This was a weapon that targeted the soul as much as the body. Thanos, a colossal figure standing outside the dimensional prison, watched with cold detachment. He clenched his fist again, and this time, the Space Stone and the Power Stone ignited in tandem. Above the chaotic sky of the mirror dimension, dozens of blue portals ripped open. Through them, Deku could see the void of space, dotted with distant stars. And then, from those portals came the meteors. They were immense, jagged things, wreathed in the purple, crackling energy of the Power Stone. They were not just rocks. They were guided missiles of cosmic destruction, and they all screamed down towards him. Deku's mind went blank with primal terror. There was no strategy here. No analysis. There was only the instinct to survive. He roared, a cry of defiance against the impossible. He channeled One for All into his legs, the green lightning flaring violently. He leaped from one crystalline platform to another, the meteors crashing behind him, shattering the fragile reality with each impact. The explosions were real. The concussive force, the searing heat, it all bled through the illusion. A blast wave sent him careening into a shard of reality, the impact jarring every broken bone in his body. He cried out in pain as he pushed himself away, his vision swimming. Another meteor screamed towards him. He had nowhere to run. Acting on pure instinct, he planted his feet, drew back his good arm, and poured every ounce of power he could muster into a single point. Smash! His fist connected with the superheated rock. For a moment, there was a stalemate. Then, with a deafening crack, the meteor fractured, then exploded into a cloud of superheated gravel. Shrapnel tore at his costume and his skin, but he was alive. He was panting, his body trembling with the strain. He had punched a meteor out of the sky. But as he looked up, he saw a dozen more descending. His heart sank. He couldn't keep this up. He was a brawler, a close-quarters fighter. He was out of his depth in this battle of abstract, cosmic forces. He was getting more and more injured, more and more desperate, and he hadn't even landed another blow on his real enemy. The only way out was through. He had to break the prison itself. He turned his attention from the sky to the walls of the dimension. He saw the mocking face of the reflected All Might and screamed in rage. He launched himself at it, fist first. The illusion shattered with a sound like a million breaking windows, the shards dissolving into light. But the wall reformed an instant later, now showing the terrified face of his mother. He recoiled, his punch faltering. The hesitation cost him. A meteor grazed his back, the heat searing through his costume and flash cooking the skin beneath. He screamed, a raw, agonized sound, and fell to another platform, smoke rising from his back. This was a battle of attrition, and he was losing. Outside the shimmering, chaotic cube of fractured reality, the heroes could only watch in horror. They saw flashes of the battle within, a streak of green lightning, the purple glow of an exploding meteor, a distorted image of Deku's agonized face. But they were locked out. They were spectators to a cosmic execution. Tony Stark's HUD was a frantic mess of error messages and impossible readings. Energy levels are off the charts. I can't get a lock. The dimensional signature is unstable. It's like trying to nail Jello to a wall. He's toying with the kid! Peter Quill shouted, his blasters feeling like pea shooters in the face of this. We gotta do something. The plan is shot, Peter! Tony yelled back, frustration and fear warring in his voice. His meticulously crafted strategy, the one he and the Guardians had refined, the one that depended on precision and teamwork to subdue Thanos and remove the gauntlet, was now utterly impossible. The battlefield wasn't a battlefield anymore. It was a canvas for Thanos' whims. Deku's heroic, chaotic intervention had saved them from the initial onslaught but had also thrown every tactical consideration out the window. They couldn't get near Thanos. The Titan was entirely focused on his prisoner, swatting away any hero who dared to approach with casual, dismissive waves of energy from the Power Stone. Mantis, her antennae quivering, took a half-step back, her face pale. His mind, it's so cold. So focused. There's no rage, just annoyance. Like we are insects buzzing in his house. He is entirely focused on breaking the boy. Only one man was not looking at the shimmering prison. Doctor Strange stood slightly apart, his stance rigid, the eye of Agamotto on his chest pulsing with a faint, green light. His head was twitching with tiny, almost imperceptible movements, his eyes unfocused. He was not just watching the fight. He was watching a million fights. A million timelines. He had seen the path. The one chance. The single, narrow, treacherous road to victory out of 14,605 futures. That path had begun on Titan, with a plan to remove the gauntlet. He had watched that future play out, seen its failure, and prepared himself to guide events down that same, doomed road, hoping for a different outcome. But the boy had changed everything. This variable, this raw, untamed font of power and will called one for all, had not been a factor in those other futures. Its appearance on the battlefield had caused the timelines to ripple, to shift, and writhe like serpents. The original path, the one he had seen, had crumbled. It was gone. Failure. He had felt a moment of cold, absolute despair. But then, as Deku pushed his power to its breaking point and cracked the Titan's helmet, something new happened. A new path flickered into existence. A path that had not been there before. It was 1,000 times riskier. It was steeped in more sacrifice than he could have imagined. It was a razor's edge in a hurricane, a path that led through the very heart of the storm, not around it, and it hinged entirely on the impossible power contained within the boy. Deku's chaotic, emotional intervention hadn't ruined their one chance. It had created a new one, a terrible, beautiful, infinitesimal chance. His eyes refocused on the present, a hard, grim light in them. He saw the other heroes, their desperation, their feeling of helplessness. He knew he could not tell them, he could not say, "Let the boy suffer, for his suffering is the key." They wouldn't understand. They couldn't bear that weight. Only he could. With a final, desperate, guttural roar, Izuku Midoriya smashed his way through the last illusion. He poured the dregs of his strength into a 45% Delaware smash, a flick of his fingers that sent a cannonball of pressurized air shredding through a final, mocking image of himself wearing Thanos' gauntlet. The mirror dimension shattered. Reality reasserted itself with a sickening lurch. He fell from the air, landing hard on the rubble of the real world, his body a map of torment. His right arm was a useless, mangled ruin. His left was fractured and burned. His back was a mess of seared flesh. He was breathing in ragged, painful gasps, his vision blurry with sweat and blood. But he was free, and his eyes, burning with a feverish, unbreakable will, immediately found his enemy. Thanos stood 100 feet away, watching him. He was not smiling. He was not gloating. He looked like a scientist observing the last twitches of a failed experiment. "Your resilience is admirable," the Titan stated, his voice flat. But it is the resilience of a cornered animal. All instinct, no purpose. He took a step forward. Deku tried to push himself up, to get into a fighting stance, but his body betrayed him. His legs trembled and gave out. He was on his hands and knees, panting, the green lightning around him little more than a faint, flickering spark. He had almost nothing left. The heroes saw their chance. Now! Captain America yelled. Thor, Hulk, Iron Man, they all charged. But they never had a chance. Thanos didn't even look at them. He raised his gauntlet, and the blue space stone flared to life. The very air around Deku shimmered and distorted. An invisible, irresistible force clamped down on him from every direction. It was as if the universe itself had formed a fist and was squeezing him. He was lifted from the ground, his limbs pinned to his side, held suspended in midair as if mounted on a collector's board. He struggled, he strained, but he couldn't move a muscle. It was absolute. He watched in helpless horror as Thor was frozen in mid-flight, encased in a block of solidified space-time. Hulk was caught in a gravitational vortex, his mighty roar silenced as he was compressed into a tight, struggling ball of green muscle. Iron Man's suit seized up, every function disabled by a localized EMP generated by the Power Stone. In the space of a heartbeat, the mightiest heroes on the planet were neutralized. Thanos walked forward, his steps slow and deliberate, his heavy boots crunching on the debris. He stopped directly in front of the immobilized Midoriya, close enough that the boy could see the intricate carvings on his armor, the ancient, weary light in his eyes. "You possess a power I have never encountered," Thanos said, his voice a low murmur. "It is not cosmic. It is not mystical. It is generational. A cascade of life force, passed down and cultivated. A river of souls, all pouring into one." He raised the gauntlet, bringing it level with Deku's chest. The orange soul stone began to pulse with a sickly, hypnotic light. A wave of profound dread washed over Deku, a feeling colder and more terrifying than any physical threat. It was a violation on a spiritual level. "This power is wasted on a sentimental child," Thanos declared, his voice resonating with the conviction of absolute truth. He looked directly into Deku's terrified, defiant eyes. A boy who would burn himself to cinders to save a single, insignificant life. Such a tool, in the hands of one with vision, could bring balance without conflict. It could persuade, not punish. He reached out, the glowing soul stone just inches from Deku's chest. "I will put it to proper use." Deku felt it then. A cold, ethereal hook sinking past his skin, past his muscles, past his very bones. It wasn't physical. It was an intrusion into his essence, his very being. It latched on to the core of One for All, the sacred fire that lived within him, and it began to pull. Inside the vestige world, pandemonium erupted. The serene plane of consciousness became a storm. The former users felt the alien presence, this cosmic leech trying to rip their legacy, their very souls, out of their successor. "What is this?" Daigoro Banjo roared, black whip lashing out against the formless, orange void that was encroaching on their world. "It is an attack on the quirk itself!" And shouted, his smoke screen boiling away as the spiritual pressure mounted. "It's trying to unspool us!" Yoichi Shigaraki felt a chilling familiarity. It was like his brother's touch, the cursed power to take what was not his. But this was infinitely more powerful, more fundamental. All for one stole the vessel, the quirk. This was trying to steal the river. The source. "Izuku!" Nana Shimura's voice screamed in his mind, no longer an encouragement, but a desperate, terrified plea. "Hold on! Don't let him take us! Don't let him take you!" Deku screamed, a thin, strangled sound, as he felt the core of his being torn from him. He felt the faces of his predecessors, their memories, their wills, being pulled into the horrifying, hungry light of the Soul Stone. He was losing. One for All, the sacred.